We need to elect senators who will vote for judges who follow our laws and our Constitution as written. Like Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, who's doing a great job, and Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who we're trying to get through right now.
President Trump firing up his base in Indiana this week. He's talking about his Supreme Court nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. His confirmation hearings will start Tuesday, and senators are expected to question him about a host of contentious issues, including abortion and the Second Amendment. Joining me now is Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. Thanks for joining, Elizabeth.
Great to be with you, Eboni.
Sure. Okay, so of course there will be a litany of questions, but I want to start with what I think most would agree is the most contentious one, and that is the abortion rights issue. We're seeing some narratives play out from certain high-profile Democrats. Everybody from Kirsten Gillibrand to Chelsea Clinton are hosting rallies with this really prevailing theme, and that is a confirmation for Brett Kavanaugh will mean the end of Roe versus Wade and thus legal abortion here in America. What is your response to that political narrative?
Well, it's certainly one of the key issues, one of the key rights at stake in this nomination fight. You know, on the one hand, you have the conservative base where Trump is promoting Brett Kavanaugh as someone who will meet his litmus test of overturning Roe versus Wade. But then when you see the way that Brett Kavanaugh is being marketed to moderate Republican senators and moderate Democrats who are pro-choice, they try to say that he's keeping his mind open about the issue or respects Roe as a precedent. So Trump is trying to have it both ways, but it can't be both ways. And the issue could not be more at stake here because Justice Kennedy, whom Kavanaugh would replace, was the fifth vote supporting meaningful abortion rights. So whoever takes his place is really going to be the deciding vote on that key issue.
Certainly, Elizabeth, as you mentioned, Justice Kennedy was typically that swing vote on the court. So let me ask you more specifically when it comes to Judge Kavanaugh. So he's not expressly said ever that he opposes abortion rights, but I want to read to you a statement that was in a dissenting opinion of the judges back in just 2017, not too long ago, where he said this. This was in regards to an undocumented immigrant who was trying to seek a legal abortion. He says that the government ignores its permissive interest in favoring fetal life, protecting the best interest of a minor, and refraining from facilitating abortion. So with the language used in that dissent, I think it's a reasonable conclusion that he certainly feels a particular way about legal abortion. So are some right to be concerned?
Oh, absolutely. I think that what he has written about it, that sentence that you just read in that opinion, is very concerning to the majority of Americans who actually support the right protected in Roe versus Wade. You know, in that case, the undocumented young woman met all of the, frankly, very stringent requirements of Texas law in order to obtain an abortion and wasn't going to cost the government anything to obtain that abortion, exercise her right to choose. But Kavanaugh still would not have allowed her to exercise that right. And that is extremely concerning because you can overturn Roe versus Wade outright, or you can simply gut it so there is no real meaningful access to the right to choose abortion.
A quick general question for you, Elizabeth. A lot of people are saying, and this phrase has been used often amongst those of us in the legal community, it's settled law. Right? But what we know historically is that many a settled law in this country has been revisited, and to your really fantastic point, not necessarily overturned per se on its face, right, but kind of redesigned to have less impact and sometimes no impact. So what's your just general response to the notion of settled law in the United States of America per our Constitution?
Well, I think we only have to look back at the experience of Neil Gorsuch. He said in his confirmation hearings last year that he would respect precedent, but then in his first year on the court, he repeatedly ruled to overturn precedent, including in a union case that reversed a precedent that had existed since 1977. So the Supreme Court, as the last word on the meaning of the Constitution and the meaning of the law, they really can overturn precedent if they think that it's wrong. So the real question for Brett Kavanaugh and what he should answer substantively is what he thinks is protected in the Constitution, what he thinks equality and liberty mean in the Constitution, and not just get away with using this platitude of, oh, I respect settled law.
Certainly. And to that point, a final question for you about Second Amendment rights, constitutionally protected Second Amendment rights via gun control. So we know that Judge Kavanaugh wrote the dissenting D.C. Circuit Court opinion for the kind of precedent setting and current standard bearing gun control case here, Heller v. D.C. And essentially in it, he says that regardless of, some concerns via public safety at that time, this was back in 2001, semi-automatic rifles in this case were protected by constitutional protections. And ultimately, it's important to note the Supreme Court did agree with Kavanaugh there, and thus Heller, that ban was overturned. But when we fast forward to 2018, is it your take, and I want your take, on whether or not Judge Kavanaugh will be able to substantively take a look at the new facts of public safety and concern and then apply the constitutional standards that he holds, so dear?
So I think that that's a really interesting question, because we're not just talking about whether Brett Kavanaugh will be a conservative. We know he will. But what shade of conservative will he be? Will he be extremely conservative? Or will, frankly, while the Supreme Court majority in Heller did agree that there was an individual right to have a gun for self-defense, which I agree is something protected in the Constitution, Justice Scalia's opinion, Justice Scalia, certainly no liberal, he wrote that, you don't have a right to have any gun at any time, in any place, by any person. And Judge Kavanaugh's writings on the Second Amendment seem that he would go even further. The majority of Americans agree that, yes, there's a constitutional right to have a gun for self-defense in the home, absolutely, but they also think that reasonable gun regulation can exist. And from what Kavanaugh has written, I'm not even sure that what most people agree, and probably what Justice Scalia would agree is reasonable gun regulation, would get through a Justice Kavanaugh.
Well, Elizabeth, it will be very interesting to see the substantive answers that Judge Kavanaugh gives in these
Let's hope he gives
hearings.
them.
So let's hope they're asked. Let's hope he gives them, because we know that all constitutional protections have to be weighed against those public safety and interest concerns. Thank you, Elizabeth.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Sure.